Call to order this regular Board of Directors meeting for the Siloam Springs Board of Directors, April 19th, 2022. Roll call.
Sappington.
Here.
Smiley.
Here.
Burns.
Here.
Hunt.
Here.
Rissler.
Here.
Allen. Carroll.
Here.
At this time, if you all will please stand with me as Director Carroll leads us in a word of prayer. Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let's pray. Father, tonight we have opportunity to give thanks. To thank you for beautiful weather, a beautiful city, wonderful people within it. We also thank you for the opportunity to be able to make decisions concerning this city that will be a benefit and will be a chance for those of us to live in the quality that you have given to us, and that we can be that blessing to those around us. And thank you for the wisdom and the courage to do this. In Jesus' name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. At this time, I would like to ask anyone that has an electronic device to please silence that so we are not interrupted during our meeting. Thank you. At this time, it's public input time. At this time, the public may address the Board of Directors regarding any item that is not on the board's regular agenda. Is there anyone that would like to address the board? If there is not, at this time, if there is anyone that would like to address the board concerning any item that is on our consent agenda. If there is not, then we will move on to our consent agenda. Item A, regular meeting minutes, April 5th, 2022. Item B, contract compensation study plan, JER HR Group for $55,200. Item C, dedication of utility easements and right-of-way, 1303 Brashears Road. Directors, is there any comments on this consent agenda? Any item that you would like to have pulled? If not, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Smiley.
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Hunt.
Yes.
Rissler.
Yes.
Carroll.
Yes.
Sappington.
Yes.
Consent agenda is approved. Next is presentations. First of all, we are going to recognize a 40-year employee, Mr. Dale Bennett, who works with our water treatment plant as an operator. And Steve, at this time, if you would like to come forward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board, Steve Gorzek, Public Works Director. It gives me great pleasure to introduce a young man who I've worked with for my brief tenure here, and I say brief because this fellow dwarfs the amount of time that I've been here, and that's Dale Bennett. Dale's our water treatment plant operator. He's been with the city for 40 years, starting way back in 1982. He started working at the wastewater plant for 5 years, I believe, and then the last 35 at the water treatment plant. So he's seen the last upgrade, which is, I think, is pretty big accomplishment. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dale.
So Dale, on behalf of the City of Siloam Springs, we would like to say thank you. I want to say that I read your answers to your questions whenever they did your interview, and I think it speaks very highly of our city and of you as an employee that you said that you love your team. That's why you love working for the city, that the most important thing for you is family. and I agree with that. So, and you are part of our family, and we thank you for your service. So, on behalf of the city, I would like to extend this plaque to you in appreciation of 40 years of dedicated service to the city of Siloam Springs. Thank you. And at this time, we are going to have the introduction of new officers in our police department. And Captain Miller, if you will come forward, please.
Madam Mayor, members and ladies and gentlemen of the board, Captain Scott Miller, the Siloam Springs Police Department. If you guys would come forward, stand right here, please. The police department often likes to acknowledge our newest employees and kind of put a name to the face for all of you and the public. And so we're pretty proud of these 5 individuals that just recently completed their 12-week academy at the Law Enforcement Training Center in Elm Springs. The first officer I'd like to introduce is Cesar Barrientos. Cesar was also a post lead or squad leader, for the Academy cadets. So we want to recognize him for that. We have Joshua Carlock, Christian Carter, Edward Galvez Lua, I got it close, and then Christopher Ramos. And we're just very proud of these 5 individuals for coming on board, and they're doing a fantastic job, and they're learning the streets and the city quite well, and we're excited to have them. So thank you for letting us introduce them.
Thank you, Captain Miller, and thank you all for your service to the board. Yes.
Joshua second, Edgar third, Cesar fourth, Christian Carter last, Scott, you jump in there wherever you want. Got it.
All right.
How exciting. New employees and 40-year employee. I think that's great. So next is our regularly scheduled items. First is Ordinance 22-09, second reading, amending Section 102-21 of the City Municipal Code, rezoning from C2 to RO 799 South Lincoln Street. Ben?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the board, Ben Rhodes, Senior Planner. Yes, as the mayor mentioned, this is a rezoning from C2 to RO residential office at 799 South Lincoln Street. There have not been any additional comments since the first reading, and we are still recommending approval, and we stand ready for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address Ordinance 22-09? If not, directors, comments or questions? There being none, do I have a motion to place Ordinance 22-09 on its second reading, suspending the rules, reading title only?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I would like to put it on the second and third reading.
Okay. So we have a motion to place this on its second and third reading, suspending the rules, reading title only. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Chrysler,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley.
Motion is approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 22-09, an ordinance amending section 102-21 of the Siloam Springs Municipal Code, City Zoning Map, rezoning from C2 to RO, property located at 799 South Lincoln Street.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adopt ordinance 22-09?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Ordinance 22-09 is adopted. Next is ordinance 22-10, second reading, Electric Department Code Amendment, Section 98-75.1, Service Extension Fees. Phil?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. Phil Stokes, Electric Director. As you guys know, the cost of electrical materials has just skyrocketed lately, and the service extension fee helps us keep these fees from getting out of hand so that we don't incur a large expense for new subdivisions. These proposed ordinance change would allow us to review these fees every quarter instead of every 6 months as we do now. We have notified the developers of the proposed changes and have not received any comments. We ask that you approve this ordinance change and are available for any questions.
Thank you, Phil. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak to ordinance 22-10? If not, directors, comments or questions? There being none, do I have a motion to place ordinance 22-10 on its second reading, suspending the rules and reading title only?
So moved.
Good.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Rissler,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley, Burns,
Yes.
Hunt.
Yes.
Philip?
Ordinance number 22-10, an ordinance amending section 98-75.1 of the Siloam Springs Municipal Code for the purposes of updating terms of service and rates for service extension fees.
Thank you. Next, we will move on to our staff reports. First on our list is the offer from the Oklahoma Secretary of Energy and Environment Department and the Grand River Dam Authority to purchase Siloam Springs Water Resource Company property in Oklahoma. Philip?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Board, the city is the sole shareholder of the Siloam Springs Water Resource Company, which owns approximately 440 plus or minus acres in the state of Oklahoma around the old Lake Francis Dam site. And I'm going to try to get to the other slide. Give me 1 second. So in 2020, the Siloam Springs Water Resource Company, with the approval of the city board, deeded 17 acres to the Grand River Dam Authority for the construction of the Woka Kayak Park. And since that time, staff has had discussions off and on with GRDA about their interest in purchasing all of the remaining property that is owned by the Siloam Springs Water Resource Company, specifically the property that used to be the old lake bed for Lake Francis. The map that you have on the screen today, it's not the clearest, and I apologize for that, but there's the 440 roughly acres consist of where the red circle is, where the water intake is for the city. The property north of that or above that really consists of the land where the city has its water pipeline running north from the intake toward the city and toward the water treatment plant. Section 17 is really the old lake bed for Lake Francis. That's 200 some odd acres. And then the city also owns 3 other separate parcels, which I've referred to as Section 19 down at the bottom left, Section 20 in the middle of the bottom, and Section 29. And the majority of the land in between all those sections is owned by GRDA. And Ed Fight with GRDA is here. He can speak to that. It's not all owned by GRDA, but the majority of that land around that is owned by GRDA. So You have a copy of a letter from the Oklahoma Secretary of Energy and Environment offering to purchase 339 acres for $375,000. The total number of acres continues to shift a little bit as we've tried to refine this, but that comes to about $1,106 per acre. And based on one thing I wanted to show on this map here is all of that property is in the 100-year floodplain. It's really undevelopable from that standpoint. And I'm going to jump to this screen here. The area that's taken out of what would potentially be sold to GRDA around the water treatment plant, we've been having some discussions about that. The Arkansas Health Department requires the city to own, or a governmental entity to own, 300 feet on either side of the riverbank, a minimum of a quarter mile upstream and a quarter mile downstream of the water intake, subject to there not being a dam or some other structure that would prohibit the water from backflowing. So if you go downriver, we own to the dam, we own past the dam, but as far as the health department would be concerned, the buffer zone, 300 foot on either side of the river, is downstream is limited to the dam. The health department agreed to us selling to GRDA on the north side of the river for WOCA that property, since GRDA is a governmental entity. So we've been having some discussion about whether or not to sell that buffer zone to GRDA or not. The idea that we had was to include the 221 acres of Section 17, the 28 acres in what's called number 3 here, which is, I believe, Section 19, and then the 25 acres in Section 20, and the 42 acres in Section 29, and sell that to GRDA. That acreage, 317 acres at the $11 or $1,100 and $1,106 per acre would be just over $350,000. The idea from our standpoint, from the staff, we have always had a difficult time in trying to manage the property and keep trespassers off of it. We've lost property in the past to people who have filed adverse possession claims to the Siloam Springs Water Resource Company. And it's really, really difficult for staff to continue to go over there ever so often and try to manage and keep people off that property. The last slide that I think I have is an additional 37 acres. So this is the area 300 feet on either side of the river, a quarter mile upstream, 300 feet on the south side of the river, down to just below the dam. That's the area that generally consists of the buffer for the Arkansas Health Department. And part of, and if I may, I'm gonna show it on this screen and everybody can't see it, but part of the acreage up in the northeast corner on that screen, some of that acreage is subject to 99-year leases to residents. And that 99-year lease straddles some of the buffer that the health department requires and some of the land that's outside of the buffer that the health department requires. So we felt we didn't want to, divide a lease where you're leasing it from part of it from, if you decide to sell it, part of it from GRDA, part of it from the Siloam Springs Water Resource Company. If the health department would agree to limit the upstream buffer to a quarter mile, which I believe they would also likely agree that GRDA, as they did in the past, is a governmental entity and agree to sell that acreage to them too. If you're in agreement with this, we would say that any sale would be subject to Arkansas Health Department's approval, because we have to get them at least to agree that the minimum upstream buffer area is a quarter mile, and also subject to a deed restriction or a conservation easement on all of the property, limiting any use of that property to passive recreation. Trails, GRDA would like to build a boat ramp toward the bottom of area Section 17 to allow people who are floating from Arkansas into Oklahoma an opportunity to get out and bypass the Woka Kayak Park and then put back in downstream. But I wanted to bring this forward and see if there was interest from the board for staff to pursue this, and if so, if you had any other concerns. If we included the 37 acres to the 317 and we kept at the $1,106 per acre, that would round up the number to $391,000. And Mr. Ed Fite would have to go back to the Secretary of Energy and Environment in Oklahoma and ask them to commit a few more funds for that purpose. But it's been an ongoing issue for us because of the fact that the Siloam Springs Water Resource Company is not a governmental entity in the state of Oklahoma, and that adverse possession claim is always sort of hanging over our head if we see people that are camped out or trying to use that property for long periods of time. So I'm happy to try to answer any of your questions. It's been, for me, the first 3 or 4 years that I was here, trying to just get a handle on what exactly we own and get actual legal descriptions has been a nightmare. And this is the best drawings, the best legal descriptions that we have found to date as defining the property that we actually own in Oklahoma. The idea would be not to sell, obviously, the intake, to keep a large enough area around the intake in case we ever needed to broaden that or expand that, and to retain ownership of the property going north from the intake that contains the water, the raw water line leading from the intake to the water treatment plant. But generally all the property south of the river, south of the intake, and some of the property around that bend, subject to the health department agreeing that GRDA again is a quasi-governmental entity, which is what they've done in the past. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Directors? Mindy?
I do have a comment or question, but do we open it up to the public first? Or do we need to?
You can, yes.
We certainly can.
And
Would you like?
Your fight
okay.
is here to speak if you have any questions,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Unless you can give me reasons why we should hold on to this, and what I've heard so far is more justification for selling it in terms of just the challenges with maintaining it, then I would be in favor of selling. But I'm wondering what the possibility would be to earmark some of the money received for streets or something along those lines.
Well, I think the board could choose to earmark the money however the board wishes. We at the staff would probably recommend to put some of that money into an account under the name of the Siloam Springs Water Resource Corporation. The idea of having the Resource Corporation in Oklahoma is because Oklahoma governmental entities do not enjoy tort immunity. So it's trying to create a buffer. If something were to happen over there and somebody were to get injured and sue the Water Resource Company, we're sort of separate from them. There's not that much separation today because the Water Resource Company doesn't have its own funds. So that would be one thing that we would suggest, is to put a portion of that money in the name of the resource company. But you know, let's say it's sold for $375,000. Don't hold me to these numbers, but put $100,000 in an account for the resource company, and the other $275,000 would be up to the board to earmark.
Mayor?
Yes.
You know, I don't want to jump the earmark bandwagon, but it would be a perfect opportunity for engineering design for Sacred Creek. Water for water. That's not my point. I'm feeding off Mindy. I think Marla and I, last time this came up, and don't quote me, Marla, we didn't want to sell it. We wanted to hold on, and we wanted to wait. And I think, in my mind's eye, this is what we were waiting for. Waiting for Woka to come on board and to see that this all happen in there. And I was just talking to Ed earlier about, you know, just some broader ideas. It's not going to be commercialized. It's, you know, be a wetland area. It has just a ton of potential, not only recreational, but educational. And it also, keeps our quality of water secure. And I think it's, I'm pumped about this whole site, so I'm on board however you see to go forward. And please get as much money out of the state of Oklahoma as humanly possible.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Carol.
I've always thought that, well, for some time I've been a proponent of disposing of that property to some extent because I know how hard it's been to maintain and keep people off of it. So I am in favor. I think it's a good way to do some conservation of that area, protect our water, which we need to do. So I am in favor, as it is described here, of selling the property.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Marla?
sorry I don't have much of a voice tonight, but I can still say, no, I don't totally agree with this, and I never will agree with selling land and holdings that is a precious commodity that can never be replaced. We throw over $300,000 out on a new trash truck that we expect to last 5 to 7 years. I don't like to hear that it's a 100-year floodplain, nothing developable, and we just bought a new warehouse building that's in a floodplain. So that's not consistent for me. I feel like if we're going to look at selling this, we need to look at a partnership or an agreement, and some of the land is not contiguous. It doesn't need to be included in the sale. I want more specifics before I say I do want it environmentally kept. I don't want development. But just to hear that they're already planning to put boat ramps in and out, they're expecting us to do this. It's a good deal. And I think we need to look at what our other alternatives might be, because they're not making any more land. And we've got some. We've got a nice piece of land there, and we need to look at what's best for us and also what they can do to help make sure. I don't see any justifications. I see a letter stating this. I want to know in writing exactly what they're going to do for us and what we need from that to keep our water. So no.
Thank you, Marla. Anyone else?
Madam Mayor,
Reed?
I'd like to pursue continuing on with this, and the only it's not really a drawback, but I'd just like to say let's proceed with caution, but let's pursue this and see how it can be taken care of to where the wetlands can be cared for and our nature can be cared for as well, but I think it can be done.
Thank you. Lisa?
How did we come up with the cost of per acre?
That was an offer by the Secretary of Energy and Environment.
I think I've been riding on the fence with this because, like Marla said, land is pretty precious right now, and we see that we have a housing need. We see that we have a shortage of land around our community, and I know this is in Oklahoma, and I agree with Brad. It's a protection of our water, and I also agree with him, believe it or not, that the Sager Creek is important too, and if we're going to earmark money, I agree with the Sager Creek money. Me riding on the fence is the value of the land and preserving it as we say parks or whatever it is. Can we say that it has to stay that way for a specific amount of years, that they can't develop on it? Can we put those restrictions in there? Because
Yes. The idea, I wouldn't recommend it unless there was a conservation easement on it or a deed restriction that said the only thing they could do with it would be passive recreational use, which would be, and we would, i.e. trails for walking trails, a boat launch would, and Mr. Fite could speak to the boat launch, but the idea is to be able to at least put a canoe in, take a canoe out, probably a limited you know, we could ask them to come up with a design for a limited amount of parking, whether it be paved or it probably wouldn't be paved because of flooding. But the idea, we could ask them to, you know, define how they're going to use it. I would likely, if I was the buyer, I wouldn't want to say this is the only thing we can do. But if we can say it's a conservation easement, you can't clear cut it, you can't build vertical structures on it other than maybe a changing room if there's a boat launch there. You can't pave over it. I would not be here recommending us sell it if we didn't do that. It is in the floodplain, and yes, historically, there is development in floodplains. Going forward today, you do everything you can not to develop in a floodplain, but we as staff would not bring this forward if we felt that there was an opportunity for somebody at a later date to develop it and make a profit on it. And Mr. Fite can speak to this, but GRDA wants this property to protect the quality of the water, to have it as a riparian corridor and be able to protect the floods and also the water quality as it flows through there in that flood period of time and drop those contaminants that typically floods bring.
Would GRD get any, because it is a conservation area, would GRD get any federal funding?
That would be Mr. Fite's.
I mean, because if you're going to get federal funding, that helps kind of with the cost of the land.
We are getting some federal funding to help purchase the land from the Natural Resources Damage Assessment Trust Fund.
Ed, yes.
Okay.
And would you give us your name and?
Good evening. I'm Ed Fite. I'm with the Grand River Dam Authority. Previously, I was with the Scenic Rivers Commission for 33 years. And so it's good to appear before you. And I want to say that probably of all the people in the room, I've probably been dealing with the Lake Francis issue the longest. I started in 1983 as the director for the Scenic Rivers Commission. Lake Francis has had a number of issues. In May of 1990, the dam finally, the main spillway gave way and the dam failed, and so it breached. And the city elected at that time, instead of reconstructing the dam for a number of reasons, they reduced the level of the lake down to less than 50 surface acres to avoid dam safety criteria. And anyway, going forward, we have tried with the help of predecessors here on the board and the Mayor Van Pook in particular, Jim Coral, and other city administrators have been involved in these conversations at length. But the long and short of it is that it's paramount that the old Lake Francis lake bed not be developed. And the reason, they're manyfold, but the first one is that back before statehood, Arkansas has been longer in statehood than Oklahoma as a state, but most of the water lines in Arkansas were built out of lead. And in the early part of the 19th century, a lot of our water lines used lead and copper and other metals to put those service lines together. And a lot of that material has decayed in some of these systems across the United States, and you've read about those in the news and other areas of the United States. But there's residual metals in the bottom of the lake bed, in the sediment. And we had a conversation with the city at one time about dredging the lake and restoring the lake. But we also looked at Dr. Trelkeld's work in the late 70s and early 80s, and he recommended that if the lake were just left alone and let the natural succession of vegetation occur, that a lot of that would be encapsulated in carbon in trees. And so what you've seen, when I came to work in '83, you could actually run a motorboat across the lake and water ski. If you fell off your skis, if you were outside the main river channel, you just stood up, got back on the skis and went. Camp Paddle Trails had a number of sailboats that they operated there, the Sunfish sailboats. And so there's been a lot of activity in that particular acreage right there. But our intent is, one, to protect the city's water and to provide a reasonable opportunity for the city to enjoy a water intake there. Second is to construct a natural functioning wetland based on a charrette that the University of Arkansas hosted in 2013. That's the template for this process. And we're going to reconvene some folks from Arkansas and Oklahoma from academia and some of the folks that were involved in that. If we were able to, well, we're going to do it anyway. We've bought about half the lake bed. And I can sit here all night and talk about history, but there was a legal challenge when the dam failed in the city of Siloam Springs, and the Water Corporation then had a legal battle where you ended up losing about half the lake bed in that challenge because some of it had been leased to the city. And when the dam failed and there was no longer a lake, there was long protracted litigation that eventually a settlement was reached. But we have approached that particular landowner. We tried to lease that up through a riparian protection conservation strategy, and we ended up buying it. And so we bought his portion of the land, and as WOCA has come together and we watched some of the other things going on, it makes sense to GRDA that in the long haul, GRDA is going to be here. They have the resources, and what we would like to do is take that template and restore Lake Francis to a functioning wetland design with passive recreation and education components. Now, the mention of the boat ramp is simply to give boaters, what is going on in Arkansas is we have a lot of boating activity on the Oklahoma side, and it's beginning to ramp up on the Arkansas side. Simply in the 20s through the 40s, most folks used john boats and canvas covered canoes, and that's how they recreated, that's how they fished. Then post-World War II, we started getting into lake building business. And folks were able to buy boats and lake houses and so forth that were reasonably priced. Today now you're seeing some of these wake boats and fishing boats that are commanding $100,000 or more. And you're seeing the price of real estate to have a lakefront is skyrocketing as well. And we don't want that to happen at this particular water source. And so we've reached out to the city. We want to partner with the city. And the reason I mentioned Jim Coral is at one time there's been discussion that the city wanted out of the land business in Oklahoma, that they wanted to get away from the lake. And so now we have come together and we've been able to fix the dam problem by working together collaboratively. And that started because of the city of Siloam Springs. Moose Van Pook and David Cameron. I was involved in the run-up to your new wastewater treatment plant and made a trip to Washington, D.C. to try to secure funding for that. And there was a lot of trust that had been built between the Scenic Rivers Commission, now GRDA, and the city. And mention was made that there was going to be work done on Fisher Ford to expend about $2 million to make a water park out of that. And simply it comes down to this. I had a conversation with David Cameron and Moose Van Pook and said, if you're going to do that, won't we do something with Lake Francis, and then we have a water park on each side of the town, and it brings people to Siloam in this region, and you have a recreational component that adds to the three legs here in the city, and that is having a robust economy, a good environment, and quality of life. And you recognize that. You have this wonderful trail along Sager Creek, and it's one of the attractions why people are coming here at 5 o'clock in the afternoon when people get off work. They have a water resource that they can go to. And that's what's getting ready to happen south of town with this WOCA project. And we didn't envision being in the recreational business at WOCA. This is going to be like the water park. It's going to be paid for parking. We may have boats there. I'm not in charge of recreation component of WOCA any longer. I no longer manage the Illinois River. We have a new manager by the name of Jared Skaggs. He's a younger guy, and he's going to take it to the next level as far as managing recreation. But getting back to Arkansas, Walmart, Academy, Tractor Supply, wherever you go, now have kayaks for sale. Getting past that $100,000 boat example that I was giving you in the expensive lake houses, a family of four now can go to Walmart and outfit with 4 kayaks, paddles, and life jackets for around $2,500, and it makes it reasonably priced where they can go out. And in Arkansas, you have 82,000 miles of streams. if they have a public access or a road crossing or something that's owned by the public, they, in essence, can hop on a river and go and enjoy it. And that's what you're going to see. People want to be outdoors. They want to be around water at the end of the day. And so this is a partnership. This is not that GRDA or anybody from Oklahoma wants to come in and buy the land and then speculate and develop it. That's the last thing in the world we want, because on the west side of the property that we bought, we are dealing with approximately 18 structures that are squatting, and we're going to have to remove those. And every acre of land that we protect in that lake bed benefits the city with your drinking water and those that you supply water to. And the long game is this. I want to describe something to you, and bear with me. Is when 1983, when I came to work, there were 179,000 people lived in the entire 1.1 million acres that we call the Illinois River Basin. That's Bentonville, Fayetteville, Springdale, Rogers, down to Gore, Oklahoma. Hogeye, Arkansas is where the river starts. Today, the numbers are over 600,000. Now, the comparison is if everything were equal in 1983 with 179,000 people, everyone had 6 acres of land that they could roam around on. Today, we're down to 1.5 acres. And going forward, the demographers say we'll be somewhere on the order of 1.2 to 1.4 million out to a planning horizon somewhere around 2050. If that comes to bear, we're going to be less than 1 acre per person. And so open space is going to be very valuable, not in the sense of dollars in the bank, but to quality of life for communities like Siloam Springs. And if you haven't got opportunities for your citizens when they get off work to be out of doors and have a safe environment where they can go enjoy the chemical, physical, and biological considerations of our environment, they won't stay here. And that's important to remember. And so this is not a land grab by Oklahoma. This is a partnership that we're trying to come in and reasonably approach this. We are going to take that charrette, and if you haven't seen it, I'll make sure you get a copy of it. Because what was interesting, we had these work groups at the University of Arkansas working on this, and they basically all came together with the same recommendation that you're looking at what's going on. The Whitewater Park, the wetland, the passive recreation, the education outreach. Probably the only thing that we would probably want to make clear is we're not interested in owning the dam at all. And that's from the get-go, that's been stated by the GRDA Board of Directors. The second thing is that Cheryl Cheadle, who is known widely in the conservation arena both in Arkansas and Oklahoma, she has always wanted to have an education outreach center somewhere in that part of the world. So we may try to negotiate where we can take an acre and have a changing room, but also a little amphitheater or a center where kids can come and we can have different types of venues for them to learn. And the one thing about having a wetland, have you been over to the Osage Park at Bentonville where the airport is, and they have the wetland there and the climbing wall to the north and so forth, and just see the sheer number of people that go there? And for instance, or your own water park on Saturdays and Sundays, look at the sheer number of people that are there. But anyway, do you have any questions for me? I'm going to get you some answers to your questions as far as the boat ramp goes on that south end. That's my idea, to get people away from your water intake, allow them to have close access to Highway 59 so they can put their boats on a shuttle, go up to the 59 bridge in Oklahoma, the US 59 bridge, put back on the river, and go downstream. And Arkansas folks right now, the Illinois River Watershed Partnership, about 2 weeks ago, had a recreation discussion for the very first time, and they're wanting to grow recreation in this part of the world on your streams. And so that's going to be coming. Chamber Springs, east of town, is on the radar screen. There's a couple of places where the old highway was cut off with the new alignment of 412. They're looking at that. And so as people move in, they're going to be looking for places to go like the Illinois River. And so use it to your advantage because, well, you have your new bike and kayak shop downtown in the old post office. If they wouldn't invest in something like that if they didn't know something they already know. And also we have a kayak manufacturing facility that's coming in northwest Arkansas from the state of Washington. Eddy Line is coming here, and they're going to be building boats here which will rival the Jackson boats that come out of Tennessee that most of the commercial folks are using. So I could talk all night, but I've been doing this almost 40 years, and this is a win-win deal for the city of Siloam Springs.
I have another question.
Go ahead.
Earlier, Philip, and you might answer this, but Philip, you made a statement that GRDA is quasi government. What do you mean by, I know what quasi government means, but what do you mean by GRDA's quasi government?
Well, they're not a governmental agency, but they operate like a governmental agency in the state of Oklahoma.
Is it because
So-
of the funding they get from the Oklahoma, or is it because, or federal dollars? Or
We are a conservation authority that was established in the 30s, and we have gravitated back and forth, but we are a state authority. We are recognized as an agency of state government, but we generate our own revenue. We receive no dollars from state appropriations, none. We generate our own. Matter of fact, you're one of our customers with electricity. We sell wholesale power, and you stole Phil away from us, and he was on that. Where'd Phil go? Anyway, he was on our team, Phil Stokes, and anyway, he was at GRDA, but
The reason I said that because the Arkansas Health Department says that we have to own that buffer zone, 300 feet on either side of the riverbank, a minimum of quarter-mile upstream, or it's owned by another governmental agency. So when we did the Woka Park, we had to convince the Arkansas Health Department that GRDA was a governmental agency, but they're regulated by the state of Oklahoma, but they don't receive, public monies from that standpoint. So it was classified by the Arkansas Health Department as a quasi-governmental entity, which met the requirement for the land to be owned by a governmental entity.
Well, there's a lot of agencies that they're governed by the government, the Oklahoma government or Arkansas government that aren't.
we're governed by Oklahoma, but we have a board of directors, and we have specific legislation that's been enacted that gives us the authority to do some actions that other state agencies don't enjoy, because we are more of a business than we are an agency.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I think of you
Okay.
as a business. I'm sorry. And,
Well-
and you also said that you were getting federal dollars. So whenever you get federal funding, they put a lot of restrictions. I mean,
No,
what kind of restrictions are they putting?
these dollars that are coming to us are from federal actions, that where someone has pollution or something like that, that where dollars are allocated to the state through this Natural Resources Damage Assessment Trust Fund. And so we're able to tap that for projects that are beneficial to the environment and beneficial to the public that we serve.
So this is where I look at it. Because you're saying GRDA is a quasi-government, I do think that should stay as a natural resource. I don't want to see a lot of development. When you go to these other lakes, you can't even put a boat dock on now if you buy a piece of property because there's so many restrictions. I don't want to see that land overdeveloped like we have seen in other areas around other water resources.
Well, I'm not the final say for GRDA, but we do want the conservation easements because that's what, I am no longer the administrator for the Scenic Rivers Commission. We merged into GRDA in 2016, and all the things I did in law enforcement and recreation management, all of those have been shifted to other folks. My sole focus is water quality. And since 2016, we have placed about 1,500 acres into conservation easements that are 30 years in duration or longer. We only have one that's in 20 years duration. I need to correct myself that they didn't want to go the full 30, but we've been going out and paying landowners to remove the cattle, to stop the fertilization, to stop the pesticides and the development and so forth, stockpiling old appliances and trash and cars and things like that in the draws and the drainages. And that's my role. That's if you look at my career, my default has been water quality for almost 40 years. And that's what I'm trying to do, is to protect your water as well as everybody else's water.
Madam Mayor?
Just one second, if I may. for clarification, when you talked about a 20 or 30-year conservation easement, that is when you're purchasing a conservation easement from a private landowner.
We're paying them to idle the land.
And GRDA would not be objectionable to having a permanent conservation easement on this land.
I don't think we would. I don't think there'd be any objection
To
at
make
all,
sure
because
that
it's,
we are not talking about a 20 or 30-year conservation easement.
we're talking in perpetuity.
Yes.
And that was my question. I read this condition here where it says staff believes that it would be in the best interest of both the SSWRC and the city to sell the land to GRDA, subject to the following. The second item here is GRDA agreeing to a conservation easement being placed on all of the property, preventing any new uses of the property, other passive recreational uses, other than, I think, recreational uses. So that could be binding for
Yes.
whatever term we ask for it to be binding, either 20, 30 years or permanent.
We would recommend permanent.
Permanent.
Yes.
So doesn't that protect from some of the concerns that are being expressed?
And is it all the land, or is it just around the water?
We at GRDA have been entering these conservation, riparian protection conservation easements with these landowners, and I'll make sure that Phil gets a copy of one of those agreements, but you'll see that all the things you're talking about, we encapsulate in our agreements with these landowners. And our agreements are 12 pages in duration, and really the first 2 to 3 pages is the meat of it, but the last 9 or so pages, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Who's responsible for this or that, or what you can't or cannot do. And
The statement says all of the property.
It
All
would,
that
it
we're
would, it would be
selling.
our proposal that it would be all of the property.
Not by parcel?
Well, it would be
entirety.
legally described, all of the land that, if it was sold, all of that land by legal description. And if that additional, if we included, if you were agree and the state health department were to agree, not all of that 37 acres, but the 300-foot buffer on either side of the riverbank, we'd even have an additional layer of protection on it because of the requirements of the health department. We had to do, when the land was sold to GRDA for WOCA, we had to have certain restrictions going down there that there could be no storage of any, chemicals or anything like that on that property in order to protect the quality of the water near the water near the water intake. So there would be a double layer on that particular piece of property.
And there was also a condition from the federal government through the Army Corps of Engineers under the Clean Water Act. To build that project, we had to have a Section 404 permit issued to that project, individual project, and it took 2 years to get the permit. But we had to provide to them, place certain acreages there in a perpetual easement that they could not be developed. And so we have really no objection to that, but I'm not the final say going forward. When you approve this, or if you approve it, it will then go to the GRDA board, but before it gets to the board, there'll be a lot of discussion between our legal counsel and Mr. Williams, your legal counsel, and whoever else needs to be involved to work everything out to everybody's satisfaction. It's not a cut deal at this point. We have a letter that's been addressed to the mayor and to Mr. Patterson committing funds from the Secretary of Energy and Environment. And I asked him for that letter so that we could have this conversation.
I want to apologize that I did see a lot of that in there. I have not been able to get into anything all night tonight, so I didn't print anything, and I'm going off memory, and that's a lot harder than being able to look at it. So
Well, I'm certainly going to be available. One of the things that I've always done for the city of Siloam Springs is, at a moment's notice, I will drop what I'm doing and drive over here. I mean, we've had a long relationship from swiftwater rescue development in this community to wastewater, to drinking water, to other problems that we've worked mutually together on. And we're going to continue to have that partnership.
Yes, Carol.
I've worked with you for a long time because I've been on here for 20 years. And I remember when you worked with us on the wastewater situation that we had when we were doing our wastewater treatment plant. I think you helped us with that. And I believe we are all here because That is how that happens. We can't, as a city, do that probably. We haven't done it, but it needs to be done. I like this idea. I think we want to protect that land, and I think this is the only way to protect it. And if you have a conservation, is it called a conservation deed in perpetuity?
Perpetuity.
In perpetuity, it would.
That would do that.
We want a constructed wetland because it assimilates the growth that's going on upstream. Right now, if the demographers are correct and those numbers hit what they're going to hit, that means half the homes, half the roads, half the infrastructure that's going to be needed to accommodate that has not been designed or built. And I remember when Siloam Springs in the early 80s was a small town. We went across the street, the police department, the city hall, everything was in one building, and we had, some nights we had standing room only, but we didn't have the traffic jams that we used to have. Back then we didn't have traffic jams, we do now.
Madam
So-
Mayor,
Yes, Marla.
and I'm not going to get on my soapbox, but I just want to share the fact that, yeah, I know where Hugh Quicks was landing on City Lake. I learned to fish there. I've been at City Lake when they had the club and everything. I grew up there. I want conservation, but I don't want to see, and I hear this coming through, people need a place to go. How are we going to protect the number of people that are traipsing through the woods, getting the undergrowth? That's not a riparian zone if people are trampling through it. There's got to be exact writing of what's going on, what the uses are, where the trails will be. And I want to, before I make up a mind on anything, is let the WOCA come into fruition and see what it does to us as surrounding. And that's where I stand on it, because funding from off the bad deeds of other people, you know, because someone had to pay a bad fine because they did this, and now I get that money and I'm going to do something good with it. You know, that's all fine and dandy, but it doesn't feel good right here in my heart when it comes right down to it. Everything that I hear about the lawsuit with the dam, and you all don't want to buy the dam, and just there's a lot of underlying issues that I need more information. And before I sit down to do with anything, I want to sit down with the GRDA board or whoever it is, and if they're going to decide what they're going to offer us, well, I want to be in that room saying, well, this is what I want.
I respect that. I certainly would want to be the same shape that you are, but going back to earlier, the charrette.
You would not want to be in my shape.
Sure. I've been in your shoes. I remember when it was the Wild West over here in Oklahoma when we were trying to manage water in the 80s. I mean,
I've been here since 60s.
Well, I've been around a long time, but I'm talking about in official.
In Tahlequah.
You were there in Tahlequah?
No, you were, weren't you?
I grew up in Muskogee, and I spent my summers on the Illinois.
Yeah.
So, but I live on the Illinois River, fourth generation that live there.
So does my grandparents and great-grandparents. Loop Route, Tahlequah.
I'm on a loop route. Who are your grandparents?
Tom and Madge Brannon.
I know them. Okay. It's a small world in Tahlequah. Everybody knows
It
everybody
is
singing
here
that song.
too.
So, to my point, the charrette that we developed with the University of Arkansas is driving this. And there will not be indiscriminate recreation. If there is passive recreation, there will be a trail around the outside edge, or there'll be a birding trail that goes into the wetland, but those will be managed just like WOCA, and just like the water park east of town, where the gates are closed, the park's closed. And if someone's in there, then they are going to get a trespassing ticket, or they're going to at least get run out. So.
Well, you know, I appreciate that you're gathering information from both sides of the state line, and it's going to take a lot of information to make this be the best it can be. One slip up and we could lose our water intake. One thing from the Arkansas Health Department not acknowledging this after something's done could affect us. I want to know what has to be the give and take, what we expect, how far they can go to reach the limit that we need to be protected.
Thank you. Any?
Mayor?
Yes, Brad.
One of the things, I in my 14th career, whatever my life is I work specifically now with conservation groups in Arkansas. And I won't give you the acronyms of them all, but everything that Marla's concerned about, they dot the I's, they cross the T. And what I would encourage Long Life residents, as you look at this diagram up here, and if you look at on the top right, the old Lake Francis Road, and you can see where it curves down. Everybody that's been here since the 40s, 50s, and 60s has used that as a human trash dump. That was the conservation group, out of sight, out of mind. And so I've spent an extensive amount of time in that part of the woods, and I could tell you what we're not talking about right now is that when it rains, just like when you flush your stool, it flows down the hill, right? And it goes in the stream. So everybody that lived out there in that part of the world dumped their trash in these ravines. There are really big picture things occurring just outside this little piece that will ensure that nothing gets developed. It goes to permanent conservation, and for generation to come, these green spaces will be here. And the beautiful part about these, if schools get involved and if families get involved, you can go out for free and educate. I don't have grandchildren, so grandchildren, the next generation, the generation under that, have a greater understanding than any of us had in the past. And the development of this area there, it's just really hard unless you spend time out there as it presently sits right now, and you've walked in the woods and you've seen the condition of that. We have done a poor job as a city. We have not managed that properly. Partnerships make that happen, and it's happening specifically all throughout Northwest Arkansas as we develop that these green spaces exist. They maintain well beyond our lifespan and your children's lifespan and their children's lifespan. And that's what's happening in Northwest Arkansas and now on the edge of Oklahoma, and we're going to reap that benefit. And so I just look forward to us moving forward. And I met Ed, we're telling family stories at Hanging Rock on Highway 10 teaching a water rescue class. And I went down there to help, and that's where it started. And we have our own issues in the state of Arkansas, and I think the Oklahoma Scenic River Commission and GRDA are a great example of what we need to do to regulate on our end. We have entities that are helping, but we have people here that misuse the water, and we do a poor job at it. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but I spend a lot of time on the river and the lakes. I'm a paddleboard guy, and that's just what we do now, and it's crowded. It's crowded, and it's not regulated. And so we all have a lot of issues, and this is the beginning of solving some of those issues. So I'm excited, and I know that GRDA and the city will get all the answers for my fellow board members, and we'll all be as excited as I am.
Thank you, Brad. Yes.
Sorry.
Lisa.
I'm excited about the project, but I do want to make sure we get the best value because it is going to be passed on to other projects that we need done in our community in Siloam Springs. And it is owned by the citizens of Siloam Springs. It's not owned by us 7 board of directors. It's owned by the citizens of Siloam Springs. And so I want to make sure we get the best that we can out of that resource.
Thank you. So, Philip, at this point in time, do you have your direction from the comments and direction that you have?
I believe so.
Yes, sir, okay.
We'll go to work. We'll put a proposal together. We'll work out as many of the details as we can, and ultimately come back here and do a formal presentation.
Thank you very much. Ed, thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Mayor.
being here and for giving us, sharing your knowledge with us.
Well, I could talk all night, but I'm not going to. But my final request is tonight, when you lift your prayers, remember those folks in Oklahoma that 27 years ago lost their loved ones at the mural building in Oklahoma City. This is the anniversary for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is the permanent 1-cent sales tax, and Philip, you are up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Board. Thank you for your comments on that. So we have another subject to discuss. So the city has a 2-cent sales tax today. 1 cent is permanent. The other cent is divided between the 3/8 and the 5/8. 3/8 goes to quality of life and capital projects in the utilities, and the 5/8 pays off the bonds for the water treatment plant. The permanent 1 cent sales tax was voted in by the citizens in 1978, and until 2013 it was split with 80 cents of every dollar going to the street fund and 20 cents of every dollar going into general fund. And in 2013, the citizens voted a change to that split for the following 10 years for the purposes of providing funding to public safety. And the split resulted, or that vote resulted in 40% going to streets and 40% being split evenly, 20% each for police and fire purposes, and 20% for the general fund. And this slide just talks about some of the expenditures that police and fire have done with that money. And I've got an additional, I just want to kind of run through it. So upgrading the police station, providing in-car cameras for police, improving the police training facility, relocating fire station number 3, renovating fire station number 2, constructing the fire training facility, purchasing and leasing new fire trucks, ambulances, and police vehicles. It paid for the AWINS, Arkansas Wireless Information Network, our new emergency communications network, and numerous other upgrades to personal protection equipment and to vehicle equipment for both police and fire. That change from 2013 was valid for 10 years. So it's valid through October of 2023. So in November of 2023, if nothing is done, it will revert back to an 80-20 split, with 80% going to streets and 20% going to general fund. This slide shows you the 2021 revenues of what that 1 cent sales tax produced. So it produced a total of just under $5.4 million, and 40% of that, $2.1 million, went to streets, just over $1 million went to police, $1 million to fire, and $1 million to the general fund. So that's how the current split is today. So we've been discussing internally, and we've previously discussed with the board the possibility of asking the voters to continue the split or continue the split with a modified split. So we wanted to discuss with you tonight the idea of, and really request, do you want to let the current split expire in October of 2023, or do you wish to consider putting something on the ballot this year in November, asking the voters to renew it or renew it with some sort of modification? So what you have up there for option number 1 is just to allow the tax to revert to the original split of 80% for streets and 20% for general fund. This would create an additional $2 million in revenue for streets, which would be a wonderful thing because we all know that we need more money for streets. But at the same time, it would create a gap in the general fund of $2 million, million for police and $1 million for fire. And generally that money has been used for equipment, not for personnel, but strictly for equipment. So you have to consider that piece of it from that standpoint. The second option is to just ask the voters to approve a continuation of the current split, the 40, 20, 20, and 20. This would ensure that public safety continues to have the equipment and the facility funding that they have and that they need in order to maintain their services and expand those services as the city continues to grow. And the third option we've talked about in the past is to consider asking the voters to approve a modification to the split. So, and there's all kinds of, there's all kinds of modifications. We put two examples up here. One would be taking a small portion, 2.5% from the public safety side, a total of 5%, 2.5% from police and fire, moving it over to streets, creating a 20% general fund, 35% public safety, and 45% streets. Public safety, again, being split 50-50 between police and fire. Another one we talked about in the past was moving an additional 5% of the total from police and fire over to streets, giving streets 50% of the money and continuing with 15% of the money in police and fire. So a 5% move is about $270,000. A 10% move into streets would add $536,000 additional money into streets. Every percent that you, if you look at that number, every percent that we or discuss, I was going to say mess with or mess around with, but every percent that we talk is roughly about $50,000. So if you just moved 1% over into streets, it would be an additional $50,000 in streets. If you move 2% over, would be another $100,000 in streets, right? So we got to looking and thinking about if you're interested in putting this on the November election, we need to have an ordinance passed and in effect by the end of August of this year. So we felt, in order to do that, now would be the time to at least get some feedback, have some discussion. There's no decisions tonight, but if you want us to work on an ordinance to get it approved and make sure it's passed and effective by the end of August in order for it to be on the November ballot. We also thought if you ask something in November and it doesn't pass and you wanted to modify it and ask it again in 2023, you have some room to do that, after the November election in 2022, and that's strictly a decision by the board. So in looking at all that, we thought that you've got to sort of address the needs of streets while at the same time addressing the needs of funding public safety and trying to come up with where you think and what decision would be in the best interest of the city as a whole. I talked to police and fire chiefs and said if the public were to extend this split in some form or fashion, what would be those additional capital projects that you would use this money for? So replace the trauma and the bulletproof vest, body cameras for the police department. We talked, one of the goals that we talked about the other night on Thursday night was using the jail as a holding facility. If we did that, we're going to need transportation. We're going to need a new van to transport those detainees to Benton County. Possibly a police department substation. As the city continues to grow, we're likely going to need another fire station. Fire department would like to have a new rescue truck in the long term. We also are going to have additional equipment at some point if we ever have an accident at the airport. We need to upgrade our 911 software for a number of reasons. And then just the continued replacement and maintenance of personal protection equipment in both police and fire and also vehicles over time. So Madam Mayor, that's our presentation. It is a difficult, I think, decision one way or the other, because I think this is one of those issues where you have two goals. Streets, we need money, we need streets, we need to continue to make improvements in streets. I think we're gonna continue to need to have funding for police and fire, in my opinion, and how do we balance that? And that's your decision.
Okay, thank you, Philip. So, yes, Lisa.
I have a question. So if we take it to the vote of the people and they don't vote to support police and fire, it goes back to the 80-20%.
If you don't ask for a second, you know, you could, if you do it in November of this year, you could decide to just accept that as the vote. You could say, well, you know, why did you vote no? Okay, well, maybe you modify it again and put it at a special election or in November of 2023. So you'd have a downtime because the way the state operates on sales tax, it has to occur at quarters, so you'd lose a quarter of a year potentially. But the idea, at least if you do it in November of 2022, if it were to fail, and you asked around why did it fail, well, would you support it if we did this? You potentially could put it back on a special election before it actually reverts back to the original split.
So we could have meetings ahead of time to get public opinion.
Oh, yes, ma'am. I
mean,
think
by
so.
August, right?
Well, in order to have, let me think for a second. In order to have an ordinance effective, you would have to have the third reading of the ordinance likely no later than the second meeting in July. So if you, to have, and in my case, in my opinion, you would want 3 full readings. So that means June would be the first reading of the ordinance, and we're basically 2 months out from that date.
Because we all, we all hear that streets are important, and streets are important.
Yes.
And we also, police and fire are just as important. And so I would like to see that we have meetings with the public and take advice and then vote on it in July, in June and July, I guess. Your third reading has to be in July.
Thank you. Marla?
Philip, these are some of the questions that I'm going to have. Is what part of the operating budget does those funds pay now for fire and for police? And are we looking at them strictly coming into us as designated funds, specifically when we vote like that? Because if it goes to general fund, it can basically be used wherever needed. But if we vote with these percentages, we're designating the funds.
If you give me a minute, I can give you a rough idea of what the percentage is.
I don't need to know now.
But to the second point of your question, they are designated funds. So the funds that are there today, 40% of that 1 cent sales tax has to go into street fund. It can't be used for anything else. If it is, I'm gonna go to jail, or somebody's gonna go to jail. And I don't want that to happen. Same thing for police and fire. So that money goes into the police and fire budget every year. If you look at your budget, you will see a line items called STFE, Sales Tax Funded Equipment. I don't believe the original ballot that was put before the public in 2013 specified equipment only, but that's all it's ever been used for. The question was for public safety purposes. So it could be used for personnel, but it's never been used for personnel to date. It is listed in the budget, STFE equipment, but it has to go there in their budget. Just like on another matter, we talked about the A&P taxes the other night. We have a 2 cent hotel motel tax, and that is designated by ordinance and by vote that has to go to parks. So any money, any revenue we receive for sales tax for hotel motel short-term rentals goes to parks, and it can only be used for parks purposes.
Anyone else?
Mayor?
Yes, Brad.
So in my mind's eye, I look at option 3 and obviously public input significant, but the window is short. That's the only one that allows us to give any boost to the streets. And as I read through this list, and you know, having sat through a lot of years at the firehouse, and I can't speak for the PD, although Captain Miller and I have spoke up here as a board as fire and police for pay scale back in the day, so I'm happy to see he's still employed. But the level of equipment that our PD and FD have right now is the best we've ever had, and I think most citizens that you would ask feel that we need to keep that. Having said that, there may be a percentage decrease in that, and where the PD and FD right now are saying words outside of this meeting that aren't very kind. But I only see option 3 as the only way for us to accelerate streets with this and to keep PD and FD on target with our growth and continue our safety. And you know, just recently, if you just think of if you have aging parents, if you read any of the news across anywhere, it's just nice that we can even have this conversation, because there are many cities in the state of Arkansas, and if you attend AML, that they wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. And I think it's important that we keep, and these are great, because eventually we are going to need that 4th station, and PD is going to have great needs. And if you just saw how young these new police officers were tonight, and I almost didn't want to look at them because it's so frightening of their youthfulness. But the last police chief, which a very nice man, we just disagreed on body cameras, and I think in this day and age, I think we're about 5 years behind on that program. And we talked about it in our workshop about protecting fire and police officers and making sure that they're taken care of and given a buffer. And some of this stuff on here are big ticket items. And so I would be in favor of looking at 3, and I don't know what that split would look like. And I guess hopefully we'll get some public input to give some direction. Thank you.
Yes, Carol.
I do remember when we took this to vote the last time, that we did a lot of public meetings and a lot of education to the public so that they knew what the money was going to go for. This is very tricky. We need streets, but we also need public safety. They're all 3 so important. I agree with option number 3. I think that split, how that works, I'm not quite sure. But I think we need to put a little bit more into streets. We don't seem to be getting ahead on our street maintenance. I'm not talking about new streets. I'm talking about maintaining. Our streets are really bad. But I also want to protect our police and fire. I know that they need equipment. But I'm going to go with option 3, and I think we need to have some meetings with the public to educate them.
Thank you, Carol. Anyone else? If not, Philip, do you have anything else?
No, I think if there's no other comments, very quickly, rough estimate. The 2022 police budget was 5.6 mil. That revenue is about 18% of that budget. And the fire department's budget was 6.2 mil, if I read it correctly, and that $1 million is about 16% of that budget. So it's not a huge piece of it, but 15 to 20% around, you know, that number. But it is there to help along with the equipment side of things. So I will start having some discussions with members of the public. I'll look and see about a public meeting, but I'll also try to get in front of the civic clubs and have some discussions about what their thoughts are. But likely, we would want to come back within a month and have another discussion. So I'm not going to be able to get in front of everybody in a month and get it done, but to try to get it out there and have some discussion and just give you, and by all means, talk to everybody. If they have questions, send them my way. I'll be happy to answer their questions. If you want the information, I'll be happy to answer your questions and you pass it on. But a decision has to be made, and I think it's a tough one because Director Smiley, you're exactly right. All of you are right. There's two needs, and there's only, in this case, a limited amount of money. The one thing I would tell you, if you decide to do option 2 or 3, I would suggest that you consider asking the public to make it permanent. Because if you move more money into streets, reducing some of that revenue that's currently available to police and fire, if you make it permanent, the revenue stream is only going to grow. Our sales tax right now for the last 4 years has averaged about 4% increase per year. So they're going to make up over a period of time that additional revenue. When we first talked about this last year, and we talked about moving 5% of the total from police and 5% from fire, based on these numbers, that would drop them from $1 million to $750,000, right? And $750,000 was the amount of revenue in either 2018 or 2019 that they were earning. So it's increased over the last three or 4 years, and it will continue to do so. But that's again your decision. We'll start having some discussions and see what we can glean from the members of the public that we speak to.
Madam Mayor?
Yes,
I do
Mindy.
have just a clarification from 2 different comments about the public. Director Rissler said you'd like to have some more meetings to get input, and I think I understood Director Smiley to say the meetings would be more about educating a decision that we would be making, so that's a little bit different. I can go either way. I am definitely leaning toward option 3 myself, but obviously back in 2013, the citizens did want to do that split the way it was presented. So now the question is, are the citizens willing to make a little bit of an adjustment as well? And I'm thankful that we've been able to improve equipment and provide other things that both the public and fire departments have needed. And I definitely want to see us continue with some sort of funding from that tax for them. But we also hear so much about the condition of the streets. And we've been able to do some improvement there, but we've got a long list of streets that need continued improvement. So I would be leaning toward 3-2, however that works out. And if we can get the input of citizens before we put this on the ballot, that would be great. If not, then I definitely agree. Either way, really, educating the public.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. Yes, Carol.
I do believe that we need to have some public input probably, but I think they need to know why we want this and what we want it for so they can make their decision.
Madam Mayor.
Clearly, if you decided to put this on the ballot, there would be lots of discussions, from the standpoint in the position that I'm in, I can't advocate that you vote one way or the other, but the argument of being able to say, here's the facts, here's why the board has done what the board's done, and you need to decide whether or not, what you're trying to do is to balance that revenue stream into streets, let's say, and public safety, and that's going forward, and that's why we're doing it, and give them the numbers so that they can make an informed decision. There would be lots of that, just like when the city asked in 2016 to extend the 3/8 cent sales tax. There was a lot of discussion before that vote about promises made, promises kept, and that's the same thing we would do here.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I would also want to make sure that the citizens have input on a permanent tax or not. I'm not for permanent taxes. But if I'm convinced there's a value and, you know, but I want the citizens to have an input on that as well, because it is their future. It's our grandkids.
This
And-
is a
and
permanent tax.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's a permanent tax today. The 1 cent sales tax will always be there unless
Just on the split.
it's just a question of the split. Do you make the split for 10 years?
I thought it was only on 1 cent of the 2 cent.
Yes, yes. So there's a 1 cent permanent sales tax.
Right.
And that 1 cent sales tax was split currently for 10
Okay.
years. And the question of permanency would be on the split. If you wanted to say, let's don't deal with this 10 years down the road again. If subject to what you decide to do, if you wanted to say, let's move a little money here or there and change the split, do you want to make that permanent? Do you want to ask them to do it only for the following 10 years and then have to deal with it again in 10 years? It's a little bit more difficult, I can tell you, from a funding standpoint and a planning standpoint. I mean, I've been, Chief Kreiner can tell you, and maybe Captain Miller can tell you, you know, I've been pushing them for the last 2 years to say, you guys have to be planning on the fact that you might not have this money at the end of October 2023. You can't be planning to have that money because we don't know what the board's going to do. We don't know what the public will do. So we can't do some of the projects that we would like to do because we can't guarantee the funding stream. So making that funding stream permanent, regardless of whatever the split is, from a management standpoint, I think is important. But again, it's a question of what does the board want to ask the public to do and what does the public say? But the 1 cent will always be there unless the public votes it out completely. But even if they vote your split down, the 1 cent's in there. It's just going to revert back to an 80-20 split.
And I'll help any way I can on the public meeting.
I'm sure you will, and I appreciate it. And I think all of you need to, you know, start talking to folks about what they see. And I, again, anytime if you have people you'd like me to speak to about it, I'm more than happy to do that.
Thank you, Philip. And next, we move on to the first quarter reports for the Chamber, Main Street, and History Museum. And after that, you will also be doing the first quarter update for the board 2021-22 goals.
So you have the three reports from the nonprofits that you have agreements with, the Chamber of Commerce, Main Street, and the History Museum. And I won't go through those, but if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to try to answer them. And if I can't answer them, we'll get you the answers from those entities. You also have my update for the first quarter 2022 goals, which we are now working on, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have those either now or later. I won't go through all of those. Historically, we don't go through them line item by line item, but I have added, at the request of Director Sappington, I've added some attachments to that report, a full list of all business licenses that were issued in the first quarter by the city, and also an update of projects that the city board has approved. So development projects, whether they're in preliminary plat stages, how far along are they? If it's a subdivision and it's in a final stage, have they started building houses? And if so, how many permits we've issued? Just to try to give you an idea of where those projects are and what's the status of all those projects. So if there are no questions, I'll move on to my administrator's report, but feel free to contact me if you have any questions.
Directors, are we ready to move on? All right. Thank you, Philip.
I apologize for taking up as much time as I'm going to take up, but I have a fairly long administrator's report also. I have 3 official expenditures to report: $34,200 in the airport for jet fuel. Jet fuel has gone up. We generally don't purchase more than $30,000 at a time, but based on the cost, we're now over the $30,000 mark, which is the reporting threshold. $49,900 in public works for the water treatment plant to repair the roof on the operations building and the replacement of the roof on the office building and shop building. That was a budgeted item, so we were in the process of making those upgrades. And then in the electric department was also a budgeted item, a tensioner trailer, which is the trailer that holds the spool of the wire That was a budgeted item for $52,075. That was purchased through Sourcewell and came out of the depreciation fund because we're replacing an existing trailer. And then based on Resolution 6121, we are contracting out to purchase 37.5 kVA single-phase pad-mounted transformers for $95,550. And also in the electric department, contracting out to purchase 28 50 kVA single-phase pad-mounted transformers for $99,120. And again, those are not purchases today. Those are guarantees that we will be able to have those built for us next year and be able to have those for inventory to meet our needs. The March sales tax receipts are in. The city was up 7.6% for the month and up 15.6% for the year to date. The county was up 6.13% for the month and year to date just over 2.5%. At the last board meeting, I was asked about the usage of the level 2 charging station that the city put in at the library. So since April 2021, it's been used a total of 47 times for a total charging period of 67.5 hours, consuming just over 400 kilowatt hours. The average charging time was 1.5 hours. I did a little research today. The payment is basically once a year. And so in 2021, and I didn't break down the usage for 2021, but we received about $60 in sales of electricity on that small amount of usage. I would like to acknowledge, and most of you are already aware of it, that our electric department received the Certificate of Excellence in Reliability from the American Public Power Association. We got that certificate, and historically we've been able to get that. There were 4 communities who have municipalities in Arkansas that have their own power system that received that Reliance Award. And I did a little digging on it because in years past, we would say, oh, we had a 97.46% reliability. And what I found out was it wasn't that it's a percentage of reliability. It was, I think, 97.46 minutes, which is how long the average customer was without power during the whole year. So it's a very short period of time when you think about how many minutes and how many hours are in a whole year. And the average in our area is over 260. So again, congratulations to the electric department. Phil and his crews do a wonderful job of keeping the power on in this community. And we couldn't do what we do without that. The Arkansas Department of Agriculture and Forestry Division is going to be sponsoring a Free Tree Friday on April the 29th at the library from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. They will have, I think, 3 or 4 different species of saplings to give away. And so anybody who would like to receive those saplings, feel free to visit the library parking lot on April 29th. In 2021, the state legislature adopted 2 acts, Act 747 and Act 921, which basically require law enforcement agencies in cities who operate a fire department to provide any officer or firefighter who has been involved in a critical incident to participate in a debriefing by a mental health professional and or a certified peer support member. So we have recently, since that time and those acts became laws, we've been negotiating and trying to find a therapist who has the expertise to deal with that trauma that a firefighter or a police officer might have when they're in a critical incident. And we have recently entered into a contract with an individual who has that expertise. We worked with both police and fire to find that individual and to make sure that they have the expertise. Police and fire can speak to this if you wish, but as veterans, if they've been in a critical incident, they usually don't want to discuss that with anybody who hasn't been in that same situation. So the state law says we have to provide this opportunity, and in some cases require them to go through a peer group. And if that peer group determines that they are having some mental stress because of that critical incident, then we have to provide them an opportunity to see a professional. And so we have worked out an agreement with a professional to get a reduced rate, and the city will pay for up to 6 visits with that professional. And at that time, if they need additional visits, depending on the critical incident, we may pay more, but at that time, typically it's going to be upon that individual to continue those visits. The thing I bring it to you because there were 2 incidents that are critical incidents, and you have the definition there in front of you, I believe, that employees who were not in police and fire went through in the last year or so. And we felt that if we were going to offer this to police and firefighters, we also should open it up to all employees. We had an incident not a year or so ago where a city employee had a heart attack, and their coworkers worked on them, tried to give them CPR, and the employee did lose his life. And that employee struggled with that, wondering, what could I have done? Was it my fault? And that's a critical incident that we normally wouldn't go through. And so for that reason, we thought it appropriate to open it up to all employees, not just to police and fire. But I wanted to update you on that. Today, the state 911 board voted on the number of PSAPs in Benton County. 3. So we have 4. There's going to be 3 funded PSAPs. We made a case. There was a motion to approve 4. The motion failed for lack of a second, and then it was a unanimous vote by the state 911 board to fund 3. I'll be having discussions tomorrow with Judge Mooring. We'll be talking about some ideas that he and I have of how this should work. I want to stop for a minute and ask you to give me some feedback on your thoughts. We are prepared, police and fire are prepared to come before you in the near future with presenting some pros and cons of having a PSAP and not having a PSAP. Based on some of the comments that I've heard through various discussions, I think I may know where you stand as a board on this issue, and if I am correct, I'm not sure that having that discussion about the pros and cons of having a PSAP or not having a PSAP is valuable time. So I just, if you have questions, I'd like to know. If you want us to bring that pros and cons, we'll be happy to do it at the next board meeting. But we're likely gonna need a decision on whether or not you're interested in considering consolidating, or are you interested in continuing to have a PSAP without the $250 that we currently get from the state through the 911 fees? And I have some other ideas that I won't make public today about some other ideas of where to go from here, but I want to talk to the other PSAP operators before I share those.
So you are asking some direction at this point from the board
Yes,
as far
ma'am.
as what they would like?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so directors, what is your comments for Philip as far as what you would like to see him pursue?
Mayor?
Yes.
I was trying to find an email. Oh, I think I just found it. I would like for us to move forward of always having a 911 dispatch here. But I did, because of our last meeting, I reached out to and they didn't post their agenda until yesterday for their meeting today. And so I asked for their agenda, and I did find an email, and I don't know if it'd make a difference or not, but there is an email for our 911 board. If citizens want to contact and say, hey, we'd like to keep that funding for Siloam Springs.
That vote was made today.
Right, but they still got to decide which 3 are getting that funding.
That's exactly right. And that's one of the discussions that I want to have at a later date, potentially, because I have some ideas about it, but I want the four PSAPs need to get together and talk, because all the 911 board did today was to say there are three.
Right.
They didn't decide who gets funding. I think there may be an opportunity if we could all get together and agree on something that maybe there's a way to everybody continue to keep some form of the funding. There is also the possibility that if we don't agree on which three get funded, that we may go back to the 911 board and say, we can't agree and you're gonna have to decide who's gonna be the funded three.
So when will we know that? When are your meetings?
I'll be discussing with Judge Mooring tomorrow afternoon, but I don't know that we're meeting just yet, but he's trying to set up a meeting right now with all the four of the PSAPs. So
Far away from them. And our citizens, like we had an example the other night where a lady called 911, it went to Benton County and said, I'm at wherever she was at. And they had no idea where she was talking about because they're not from this area.
there's the city planner in me, the old city planner, looks at the map and it jumps out at me that Bentonville and Rogers are urbanized area, and they're right beside each other, and the PSAPs are within 5 miles of each other. Benton County's PSAP is right there too, but Benton County probably ought to be the PSAP for the rural county. We are what's known, us and Gentry are what's known as an urban cluster. We're less than 50,000, so we're not urbanized. We're not rural because we're greater than 10,000, and the feds and census treats us differently. And because of that, from pure standpoint of growth and looking at that, I could make a case of why Siloam Springs should be one of the funded PSAPs. Rogers and Bentonville, they have both invested in their communications center with bond money, and there's some question if they don't operate a communications center with that bond money, there might be an illegal exaction. It's not a guarantee, but there's a question, a legal question there. So there's a bunch of moving parts. I think there's another option, and I think there's an opportunity but we need to we need to get everybody in the room and talk first and see. And yes, if we can't come to some sort of agreement, likely three of us will go. Benton County's most likely going to be funded, right? So then the other three of us are going to be down there making our individual cases of choose us, not them. Here's why. But I'm hoping, and I think Judge Mooring is hoping, that maybe we can come up to a different solution. But I just kind of need to know to start having discussions if, as you said, if the board today, if the board is saying, Philip, we believe, as Director Ressler said, we ought to be operating a PSAP with or without funding, then that at least tells me I've got at least an understanding of where we stand today in my discussions.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Mindy.
It sounds like even from the beginning of your asking for our information that you sort of have an idea of where we are based on previous discussions we have, where we kind of want to go with that. I am comfortable with your continuing to do what you can to make sure that Siloam has one of those PSAPs, and then we go to Plan B.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds like you've got some options. You're working toward that, knowing that seems to be what direction we've discussed in the past. So.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Brad.
So I think Philip knows where I'm coming from, but I'll Ed Fife has inspired me to remind us of history. And as a young fireman downtown, we dispatched the county. So I was, in essence, a dispatcher on the fire side, and we wrote things out in tin code in a paper log. Even now when I say things out loud, it frightens me. I feel almost like a dinosaur at some point. But when my mind goes back and remembers that, and then the progression of dispatch and all the stuff that they deal with now, it is... I'm just a firm believer that a 5 or 10 second lapse, and I think the story that Lisa was referring to was at Panther Stadium, description of a car, people get emotional and hysterical and confusion, and it gets lost in translation. 5 to 10 seconds for a PD response or an FD response is a life. And whatever we have to do to make sure that we maintain that window as narrow as possible, we must pursue that. The problem that I foresee when you say Benton or Rogers in Bentonville is I'm still familiar with those players over there, and there's a little bit of pride and ego going on, and good luck. That's all I can say about that. Thank you.
Yes, Carol.
I would like to pursue the possibility that we have a PSAP, whether we have to pay for it or not. Important to our community to have our own.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, Reed.
We need representation.
My turn.
Yes.
I I feel like we need to have our own. We are over here on the western side of Benton County, and we also take care of Oklahoma a little bit every once in a while, our neighbor. So, but also I look over at the size of Bentonville and Rogers. I don't want us to have a scrabble over who gets it and who doesn't. I just, if we need to back out and honorably say, we'll just pay for our own. Because I don't want to take away from them either. My grandkids live over there, and so do yours. So we don't, and there's a lot of people over there.
And just for the record, the amount of money that the state currently funds the PSAPs, Bentonville, Rogers, Benton County, and Siloam Springs, I mean, the reality is the money's going to stay the same. Our $250,000 is likely to be split between those three PSAPs if we're the ones that is not being funded. And ever since this came out, it is my opinion that when it came to Benton County being said that you get 2, possibly 3, everybody sort of turned west and said, oh, Siloam Springs is the one that won't be funded. And I don't agree with that yet. So I think we have a good case to be funded, and the reasons why. So I don't want to get into a scrap either, but I don't want to lay down and roll over just because they're the bigger populous centers. So
go down without a fight, but be honorable.
Thank you. As always. I think I know the direction, and we'll continue to pursue that. The last 2 items on my list, I wanted to put a shout out to Sam D., the IT manager. Sam's been with the city for 16 years. He is retiring at the end of this month. He's done a wonderful job of keeping our IT system safe and keeping us up to date. So board members, if you get the chance, stop by, let him know that you appreciate his service to the city. He put up with me, and that's a great thing because I have a lot of questions for him at times because I'm not the IT specialist. So he's done a wonderful job from that standpoint. And then lastly, we are having our all-employee luncheon on Friday, May the 6th. At the last year when we had it, some of you indicated that you would be willing to volunteer and serve the employees in the sort of buffet line. So we would ask if you're interested, please let me know. Please let me know. We'll give you masks, we'll give you rubber gloves, we'll, keep the food safe, but I think the employees would love to see you serving up hot dogs and hamburgers to them. So, Madam Mayor, that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. So we are now to the director's reports, and I will start by saying if you would put me down for help on May the 6th, I will be there to help serve the employees. A thank you to Sam for all his years of service. He has done a great job with our IT department. I know that I was on the board and he has been great to work with and very knowledgeable. He has brought the city forward, and so we thank him for that. To Dale Bennett, I want to again say thank you to Dale for his 40 years of service. He has been a very loyal, faithful employee, and he loves his job. He will tell you that. So we appreciate that and on his years of service. To our police department, Captain Miller, thank you for being here tonight and for introducing those gentlemen to us. We are very proud of our new PD officers, and I look forward to many years of service from them. So thank you. To our electric department, congratulations and thank you to Phil and his department. Our electric department has won many awards in the past and have always taken very good care of our citizens, and we have a lot to be thankful for. And I am thankful that we were able to steal Phil from the GRDA. So thank you for that, Ed. And Ed, also for being here tonight and for giving us information. We've always appreciated your willingness to work with the city of Siloam Springs. So thank you very much, and to GRDA. And with that, Mindy, we will start with you, and Carol, we will end with you.
Well, Mayor, you just pretty much read the list that I had been writing. I'll quickly repeat some of what you said. Congrats to Sam Dees for his retirement, and thank you for his work here, as well as to Dale Bennett, 40 years. That's a long time to be in one place, and that says a lot about him and the city for him wanting to be here so for that long. So congrats to both of those, and enjoy your retirement. Welcome to the new police officers. Thank you for introducing them. Just a couple extra words about the electric department. Obviously, congratulations for the recognition. And I can attest to how well they do with keeping the power on. We live in an all-electric house. We built 23 years ago, so we've been there for 23 years. And I don't think that we've been without electricity for more than a total of 6 to 7 hours in 23 years. And we would be in a world of hurt in one of those really cold spells because we don't have a fireplace or any gas heat. So we can attest to the fact that they have done a great job keeping the power on, and I appreciate that. And then I'm just going to end with, I recently had my aunt and uncle from Washington, D.C. visiting. And they are 73 and 74 years old, going on 20 and 21. I was exhausted after they left because they have so much energy. We took them on a bike ride around Siloam, about 10 miles around. We rented some e-bikes from downtown. But anyway, I just got a thank you note from them in the mail a couple of days ago, and they visited Siloam. They also visited Bentonville and some of the areas over there, and they were very complimentary of Siloam Springs, and they really enjoyed their time here. And I just thought that was worth sharing. They'd been here before, but it's grown a lot since the last time, and they just really enjoyed their time in Northwest Arkansas and in Siloam in particular. So I'll end on that.
Thank you, Mindy. Brad?
I will say it's good to be a city employee, even if it's 40 years, and if it's 16, that sounds sad, but Sam's an old Navy guy, so it's easy to bust on him. Electrical department's biggest enemy is squirrels. That's why we have that downtime in transformers. So I'd like to see the city ordinance lift the ban on hunting squirrels in neighbors' yards, but that's another time. I was happy I was looking at the parking lot goals and our progress, and it just went out on me, but and I want to read it all, but for 2021, the city placed tourism ads in the following print media. Take a look and read that. We are actively pursuing things, and I'm excited about it. And at the goal-setting workshop that we had last week, I just appreciate the healthy discussion. It went well, and we had a good debate, and we agreed to disagreed on some things, and it's all good. So that's the kind of format that I wish the federal government would follow. It'd be an interesting concept. And then I just want to congratulate our city staff. We looked at the contracts with the Chamber, Main Street, and the History Museum. You know, in our discussion there at the workshop, there is a team concept. We do work with folks. And we need to remember that we have the contract. And folks need to work with that contract, and that's very important to remember. And it's hard not to be excited about Siloam Springs. It's going to be possibly 80 degrees for the Dogwood Festival on Friday with perhaps some tremendous winds, but that's not the point. And we may have dogwoods on the trees, and there's just a ton of good stuff happening this next weekend, or this coming weekend, and I think we should be very excited about it. And even folks from Oklahoma come over, and they spend a lot of money in this city, and it's a very exciting time. So thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Marla?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I always like a healthy discussion. I usually have them with Director Burns, but tonight I had them with Mr. Fight. And but I'm very passionate about Siloam. Growing up here, I'm passionate about ecology and the environment, and I think it's because I was raised in Siloam with all the beauty and nature here. And I feel like that's a God-given gift to us, and we need to manage it and manage it correctly. And so I just think it's our responsibility to be good stewards over that. And that's what I want to be, is make sure that we make the best decisions when it comes to things that affect all of us. It was crazy tonight. I thought Dale Bennett was going to have a heart attack when Renee and I were in his face, because we all graduated together. And we grew up together, so it's like we know. But it was good to see him here. And we don't always get to see the employees. And I would like to participate in serving, but I need a ride, and I'll tell you why later. Okay? So, I love Siloam. I love being on the board, and I think that it's a true blessing to have the family that we have here. And I don't mean my immediate family. I mean my working family, my family that protects me, my family that looks over me, and my family that cares about me. And that's the employees that are in the Siloam Springs area. And we have wonderful factories, wonderful places for people to work, and we are very blessed and very fortunate. When we look at some of the things that are happening around the world, we need to just look and be thankful and drop to our knees and thank the dear Lord for taking care of us. And I plan to do that nightly, because, I do. There's so many things that go on, and even personal things, and I haven't shared this with too many of y'all, but I've lost the vision in my right eye, and I'd already lost most of it in my left eye, so I am what you called, my husband refers to it as blind in one eye and can't see out the other, but that's a joke. And I told him it was a poor joke when you make it in the eye doctor's office, to the eye doctor. But anyway, I'm living with it. I'm coping with it. Things are just fine. And I just may need bigger print and a magnifying glass, but I'm going to hang in there, and I just appreciate your support and maybe a ride every once in a while.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marla. And you will be in our prayers.
Thank you.
Lisa?
I'll volunteer to do the sign up, and I will take you. I'll pick you up. I just want to remind everybody about the dogwood. Like he said, that hopefully, I'm praying it doesn't rain. It's going to be a great weekend, even with the wind. And so enjoy it and have a good time. Be safe.
Thank you. Reed?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have a tremendous opportunity in our community to be on display for this weekend. And we can let the rest of our area, region, the rest of the world know who we are and what we're capable of. The Dogwood Festival is always a time of year where we can shine. Philip, I will be glad to serve what I can with the employees of the city on May the 6th and do it with honor. We have a wonderful city, and part of the reason is because of our employees. I'm very glad to be a part of them and to represent our city. Thank you.
Thank you. And Carol, just one thing, if I might, before we move to you. No? I spoke with one of the ladies from the IHOP. One of their employees at the main office about the pancake eating contest that they are sponsoring at the Dogwood Festival on Saturday. I am going to be emceeing that. It is going to be a lot of fun. I hope all of you are there for that. But in our conversation, she told me that they are just have been overwhelmed by their acceptance into our community and how much our citizens have supported them, that they are seeing greater growth than what they ever expected in this length of time that they have been here. So thank you to our community again for just being the people that you are, for supporting our businesses, for supporting each other. And it does not go unnoticed. And people notice Siloam Springs. People hear and talk about Siloam Springs. If you're out and about, you will hear people, whenever you say Siloam Springs, they say, oh, I know where that is. I've been there. I really enjoy your town. So thank you for Siloam. Thank you to Siloam Springs for being who you are. And so, Carol?
Well, I do have to say this is going to be one of my favorite weekends in Siloam Springs. I've always enjoyed the Dogwood Festival. It was one of the first things that we participated in when we first moved here, and we were so excited. We didn't live too far from the park, and we could even walk. So I am excited about the Dogwood Festival. I'm even more excited that the dogwoods are going to be blooming, it looks like, during this. I want to congratulate Dale Bennett for his 40 years. That's a tremendous time of service and loyalty to the city. Congratulations to Sam Dees. He did help me when I first got on the board with communication and internet and different things like that. Thank you, Philip, for all your updates that you gave us tonight. I think it was very helpful. One of the things that I enjoyed tonight was the introduction of the new police officers. I think it's important that we know who they are and we can put a name to a face, and I always enjoy meeting our new employees, whether they're the police department or any of our departments. I wanted to let the public know that even though we're coming to a conclusion on our comprehensive plan, there still is time to go on the website if you have some ideas that you want. I think there's only a few more days left, I'm not sure. But think about that. I think that's all I have, and Madam Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Do I have a second to that motion? We have a motion to second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.